She became famous for being someone she wasn't. For years, people knew her by a name that wasn't hers. Newspapers wrote about her. Strangers wanted to meet her. Her story became entertainment, but eventually the truth came out. The person behind the famous identity was not who the public believed. This is the story of Anna Anderson, the woman who claimed to be Anastasia Romanov, the youngest daughter of Russia's last emperor. For decades, Anderson insisted that she was Anastasia. Millions of people knew the Romanov story. Nicholas II had been Russia's emperor. His wife was Alexandra, and they had 5 children: Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei. Then came revolution. In 1917, Nicholas II was forced to give up the throne. The Romanov family was placed under guard. Eventually, they were taken to Yekaterinburg in the Ural Mountains. There, in the early morning hours of July 17, 1918, the entire family was killed. At least that was what Soviet authorities said. For decades, however, the exact fate of the Romanovs remained surrounded by uncertainty. And that uncertainty created the perfect opening for one of the strangest identity stories of the 20th century. A few years after the Romanov family was killed, a badly injured young woman was found in Berlin. It was February 1920. She had apparently attempted to take her own life by jumping from a bridge into a canal. She was rescued and taken to a hospital, but there was a problem. She refused to give doctors her real name. She had no identification, she barely spoke, and she would not explain where she had come from. She was eventually transferred to a psychiatric hospital at Daldorf, now known as Wittenau. There she became known simply as Fräulein Unbekannt, meaning Miss Unknown. For months, nobody knew who she was. Then another patient claimed to recognize her. She suggested that the mysterious woman looked like Tatiana Romanov. The idea was extraordinary. Could this unknown woman actually be one of the daughters of the murdered Russian emperor? At first, she did not claim to be Anastasia, but eventually the name Anastasia became attached to her, and the story began to spread. People who had known the Romanov family before the revolution started visiting her. Some believed she really was Anastasia. Others were convinced she was an imposter. The debate would continue for decades. The mysterious woman eventually adopted the name Anna Anderson. Anderson claimed that she had survived the massacre at Yekaterinburg. According to her story, the Romanov family had been attacked, she had been injured, someone had helped her escape. She had eventually made her way across Europe. The details of her story changed over time, but one claim remained consistent. She said she was Anastasia. If she was telling the truth, then one of the most famous royal families in modern history had a surviving daughter. If she was lying, then how had she convinced so many people? And why did some people who had known Anastasia personally believe her? That was the mystery. Anderson did not look exactly like the photographs of Anastasia, but photographs from childhood could be difficult to compare with an adult woman. She also knew some details about the Romanov family. She appeared familiar with certain people and places connected to the imperial household. Supporters said these details proved she was genuine. Skeptics argued that some information could have been learned from newspapers, books, or people who had access to the Romanov story. Then there was the question of her appearance. Some people saw a resemblance, others saw none. One of the most important people to examine Anderson was Baroness Sophie Buxhoeveden, a former lady-in-waiting to Empress Alexandra. She knew Anastasia. After meeting Anderson, Buxhoeveden concluded that she was not Anastasia. Other former members of the imperial household disagreed. One of the strongest supporters was Gleb Botkin. His father had been the Romanovs' doctor and had died with them in 1918. Botkin became convinced that Anderson was Anastasia. He defended her for years. This created a strange situation. Two groups of people who had personally known the Romanov family were looking at the same woman and reaching completely different conclusions. Some saw a fraud, others saw a princess. The mystery became international news. Anderson's life changed. She was no longer simply an unknown patient in a German hospital. She was now at the center of one of the greatest royal mysteries of the 20th century. People began asking questions. Where had she come from? Why did she know so much? Could she really be Anastasia? And if she was, how had she survived? The uncertainty became even more important because there was no body publicly identified as Anastasia. The Soviet government had not provided clear evidence showing exactly what happened to every member of the Romanov family. Rumors began circulating that one or more of the children might have escaped. Anastasia became the most famous candidate. She was the youngest daughter. She had a reputation for being playful and rebellious. Stories about her personality had already made her popular. Now she was supposedly alive, and Anna Anderson became the woman claiming to be her. She spent years fighting to have her identity legally recognized. The case eventually reached German courts. Anderson's legal battle lasted for decades. The courts struggled with the evidence. There were witnesses, there were photographs, there were family memories, there were arguments over physical features. But there was no definitive scientific test available at the time that could settle the question. The case became one of the longest-running identity disputes in modern European history. Anderson eventually moved to the United States. She lived in New York for many years. She attracted wealthy supporters. She gave interviews. She became the subject of books. Her story was eventually turned into films and plays. In 1956, a major Hollywood movie called Anastasia was released. It starred Ingrid Bergman as the mysterious woman claiming to be the lost princess. The movie was fictionalized, but it showed just how fascinated the public had become with the story. Anna Anderson had become famous, and yet the question remained, who was she really? The answer finally came decades later. In 1991, investigators uncovered the remains of most of the Romanov family near Yekaterinburg. Modern forensic science could now do something that earlier generations could not. DNA testing could determine relationships. The remains were examined. Genetic testing showed that the people buried there included Nicholas II, Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters, but 2 bodies were missing. Alexei and one of the daughters had not been found. That discovery kept the mystery alive for a little longer. Could Anderson still be Anastasia? Then, in 1994, scientists tested DNA from tissue associated with Anna Anderson. The results were devastating to her claim. Her mitochondrial DNA did not match the Romanov family. Instead, it matched a different family entirely. Anderson was not Anastasia. The woman who had spent decades claiming to be the lost princess was someone else. Her real name was Franziska Szankowska. She had been born in Poland in 1896. She came from an ordinary family. She had worked in Germany. At one point, she suffered a serious accident at a factory. Her mental health also deteriorated. Then she disappeared from her previous life. Years later, she emerged in Berlin as Anna Anderson. The mystery was finally solved, or at least the main mystery was, because there was still something strange about her story. How had she managed to convince so many people? How did she know details about the Romanov family? Why did people who had known Anastasia personally believe she was genuine? Part of the answer may be that the Romanov family's story was already surrounded by confusion. The revolution had destroyed the old Russian imperial system. The family had been taken away from public view. Information about their deaths was restricted. Rumors spread quickly. And then years later, a woman appeared who claimed to be the missing princess. Some people desperately wanted to believe her. Others were fascinated by the possibility. There was also a psychological element. Anderson's own identity was not simple. She suffered from mental health problems. Her memories were inconsistent. She sometimes gave contradictory explanations, but that does not automatically mean she deliberately invented everything. It is possible that she genuinely believed parts of her own story. That is one of the most difficult aspects of the case. A person can be wrong without consciously lying about every detail. But whatever Anderson believed, DNA evidence eventually gave investigators the answer. She was not Anastasia. The Romanov family had not been saved by a secret escape. Anderson had not escaped the massacre. The missing princess was not living quietly in Europe. The truth was much more tragic. The Romanov children had died in 1918. Anderson's story, however, had already become part of history. She continued fighting for recognition until the end of her life. She died in 1984 in Charlottesville, Virginia, at the age of 87 at the time of her death. The DNA evidence that would eventually disprove her claim had not yet been used, so Anderson died still associated with the mystery. She had spent more than half a century saying she was Anastasia, and millions of people had heard her story. Then science caught up. DNA testing transformed the case. It did not depend on memories. It did not depend on photographs. It did not depend on whether someone thought Anderson looked like Anastasia. It could compare biological relationships. And the results showed that Anna Anderson and the Romanov family were not related. There was another discovery that made the final answer even stronger. In 2007, archaeologists found the remains of Alexei and the missing Romanov daughter near the original burial site. DNA testing identified them as members of the Romanov family. The last major gap in the Romanov mystery was finally closed. There had been no surviving Romanov child secretly living under another name. The entire immediate family had died. For decades, however, Anna Anderson had occupied the space created by that uncertainty. She became the face of a mystery that millions of people wanted to solve. Her story was retold in newspapers. It became a book, then a movie, then another movie. And even after science settled the question, people continued to be fascinated by her, because the story was never just about a woman claiming to be a princess. It was about identity. It was about memory. It was about how easily an unanswered historical mystery can grow into something much larger. The Romanovs had been murdered in secret. Their remains were hidden. The Soviet government kept information about the deaths restricted. For decades, nobody had definitive physical evidence of what happened to every member of the family. That uncertainty created room for stories. And Anna Anderson's story filled that space. She did not just claim to be someone famous. She claimed to be one of the most famous missing people in the world. She claimed to be Anastasia Romanov, a princess whose family had vanished in one of the most dramatic events of the 20th century. For decades, the public could not be completely sure. Some believed her, some rejected her. Courts debated her identity. Former royal servants argued over her, historians studied her, and the mystery survived for generations. Then, eventually, a small biological sample answered a question that decades of arguments could not. Anna Anderson was not Anastasia, she was Franziska Szankowska, an ordinary woman whose life became extraordinary because she was mistaken for, or claimed to be, a lost princess. And that is what makes this story so strange. Anna Anderson never needed to rule a country, she never needed a palace, she never needed a crown, she simply needed people to believe her. And for decades, some of them did. The Romanov family disappeared in 1918, but the mystery surrounding them survived. And for more than half a century, Anna Anderson stood at the center of it. Her story became famous because the world desperately wanted to know whether one Romanov had escaped. In the end, she had not. But by the time the truth was finally proven, the woman who claimed to be Anastasia had already become a historical celebrity in her own right. She was not the lost princess. She was something almost as fascinating. She was the woman who became famous by convincing the world that she was someone else.